Oops. I'd like to call to order. I'd like to call to order the October 11th, 2020 meeting of the Conestoga Valley School Board. And before I say attendance, I would like to apologize to everyone here for the delay in getting started, but we appreciate everybody that stayed and all who are complying with our requests. So, yes. Note that all are in attendance except for Ms. Whitaker, Mr. Benigno, and Mr. Talley. If we could all join me with the pledge to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, welcome everyone. Board, I need a motion to approve our agenda tonight.
Motion to approve the agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We have an agenda. All right. Any board comments tonight?
I would just like to make note and thank the superintendent for his recently published article in the newspaper. As I told him personally, I think it showed just the right timber, and I think it sets TV up in the county to show that we believe in solving problems. And as a leader in education, I think that's where CV belongs.
Thank you. It was well written, Dr. Z. Agreed.
Thanks, sir.
I was privileged to attend the National Honor Society induction last week. And it was wonderful to see the kids and their parents there to celebrate their accomplishments, not only in academics, but in service. And really made me proud to be part of the CV community to see that group of students.
I haven't seen the list. Do you know how many were inducted or about how many?
Oh, probably 30.
Wonderful.
I have the list at home and I'll bring it.
All right. Dr. Z, comments from you tonight.
Yes, Mr. President. After the last board meeting, I had the opportunity to have a productive conversation with some of the parents who voiced their concerns about the masking order. As we worked on solutions and continue to share information, one thing became overwhelmingly clear. Our children are our #1 priority. When I started here at CV, I used the mantra, every child, every day, without exception. Every child should have a trusted adult in his or her life, no matter if that adult is the bus driver, secretary, teacher, administrator, or any other educator in the building. At times, COVID has tried to distract us from that goal. So much so that we now have staffing shortages in our paraprofessional staff, our personal care assistants, our food service staff, bus drivers, and our maintenance and custodial staff. To the CV community, we need your help. This isn't a right or wrong debate. This is a simple need for positive people to either volunteer for or apply for a paid position with the sole intent of making a meaningful impact in the lives of our children. Even if you only wanted to work 1 or 2 days a week, it would definitely make a difference. The more people we have involved, the better it will be for all of our children. Remember, since our #1 priority is our children, there is no side to this. It's all about them. So please work with us in continuing to provide a safe, supportive, and engaging opportunities for every child every day. All you have to do is contact your building principal or give us a call here in the district office and we'll get you connected to the right people. As a colleague of mine once said, COVID is like the weather. It will pass. Educating our children is like the climate. It's long-lasting. Thanks in advance for working together for what's really important, our children. Thank you, Mr. President.
You're welcome. All right, this is the first time in our meeting for public comments. Welcome any comments from the public. If you're going to comment, I just need your name, address, and 3 to 5 minutes of comments. Any comments? All right. Hearing none, we'll continue on.
Wes.
Yep, Wes and Don, or Wes? I see Wes. I don't see Don.
Good evening, board.
Good evening.
This evening I have 3 change orders to present. I'll start with the site contractor. We have 1 change order PCO 25 that is due to unknown conditions resulting or in conjunction with electrical work. Both the roadway that goes by the tennis courts and the roadway that we extended by the existing middle school, we found conduit that we were, I would say, not aware of exactly where it was. So that needed to be capped on each side of the roadway and then transitioned out of key civil elements. There also is unfortunately another sinkhole that we encountered. That is PCO 27 in the amount of $8,837.90. On the general contractor side, also in the theme of COVID, the roofing, we bought the roofing supplies under state contract. They were not able to supply the ice and water shield that goes under the standing seam metal roof. The GC and the roofer who will be installing that was able to locate a product. And so what you were seeing are two amounts. One is the credit to the district that is due from the state contract, and the other would be the ad that the roofer is charging. And as you can see, they do net out to an overall credit for the district, so a little bit of good news on that side. And you may have noticed this was revised. That was due to some last minute shuffling, but the overall credit remains to the district. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Do we have any complications because this was originally bid? Or we didn't have to go back out and bid, we could just make this substitution?
Yes, so we verified it with the overall roof manufacturer to make sure the product would still be warrantable. We obviously looked at the costs and made sure the numbers were shaking up.
I mean, it's a different product, I didn't know if that changed.
It does not.
Okay,
no.
good. When you say, when you say you couldn't, they couldn't supply, was that because of all the transportation problems that we're having today?
I would say generally, yes. Supply chain, transportation.
Okay, it wasn't any fault of his at all?
No, no.
Okay.
They're supplying every other, I mean, there's a whole list of products. They just couldn't get their hands on that particular one for
Okay.
whatever reason.
All right. And those are the board, they'll be on the consent agenda.
Should I stay?
You
up
doing
here?
okay?
Yep,
Right in
I
front?
was gonna say, I'll just stay. Also this evening, I would like to present Plan Con D and E. As some of you may remember, last month, I presented Plan Cons A and B. It's a tighter time frame than usual, just per the approval process. So what Plan Con D is, it is a summation of the general cost of the project at this stage in the game, which is the end of DD, the end of design development. You'll see, for those of you who have looked at it, so I sum up the cost of the building and where we are deriving those numbers from, and then in our case, Scott Kramer comes in and illustrates where the funding, Scott in conjunction with Phyllis, illustrates where the funding for the cost is gonna come from, which is what Dr. Z is starting to get into. A key part of Part D for both projects, we will not have to do the Act 34 because we are doing the additions to these buildings is minuscule compared to the existing square footage, so we're nowhere close to that threshold. I'm also presenting Part E, which is generally what I would equate to the design development, the completion of the design development. So there are drawings from all the consultants, the MEP engineers, the food service, the civil engineer, and we bundle those all together and give a general overview of the project. And then a general overview, which is actually right where Dr. Z is, of where the project is literally. What is it close to? Railroads, airports? Are there site hazards that we think might be encountered? And that is where we are at. A lot of documents, so happy to answer. A lot to get through there.
Okay, and then you're still on for, we'll do the same thing.
That's generally, yeah, it's the same thing for each building. So, very similar, at the existing middle school, we don't have any asbestos abatement, so that would be one difference between Leola and the existing middle school. or New Smoketown, but generally it's the same thing for each project. We're just moving them forward at the parallel paths.
Board, any questions on either one of those? No, like Wes said, that's a lot of information in front of you.
Yeah.
So we split it up into two.
Yeah.
It was too much for one.
All right, Wes.
Thank you.
All right, Phyllis.
Go. So I have the next couple of items. As I think you know, September is the time of year that the state publishes the Act 1 index in the Pennsylvania Bulletin. So that got published at 3.4%. Oftentimes, when that gets published, the PDE will update their website to show not only the history of the index with the new rate, but then also what's called the adjusted index. That needs to be published by the end of September. In our case, I don't ever report that to you because we don't get an adjusted index, so we just get the base index. And so then I put it into the budget calendar for you, which is sort of hard to believe. We've just started the 21-22 year, and here we are looking at budget for 22-23. But just to get the calendar in front of you so you can take a look at it. And Dr. Z, if you'd scroll down a little bit, there are two, so obviously not with having a presidential election year or anything weird that changes the dates. We're really just looking at that primary election and moving back. And if you stop right there, just up a little bit, you'll see I highlighted two items in yellow. If you go up just a tad. Yeah, there you go, thank you. You can see that the February board meeting, even though we have two board meetings in February, we have the 14th meeting targeted for the review of the state budget as well as the community forum. And then over on the right, in our administrative timelines, just wanted to call your attention. We did this in the current calendar as well because 2021 is the every 4-year cycle where the tax collector compensation rate gets established. We didn't change ours, so that just status quo. But then going into 2022, in February, we'll have to do the qualification of elected or appointed tax collectors. In our case, if we have folks who've run, our history has been that they have deputized the district to do the tax collection for the district. And then we actually have the Tax Collection Bureau, who also collects our EIT tax, do that for us. So those are really the only two kind of differences, I guess I would say, from the prior year's budget calendar. So if you have any questions, I'll answer them, but pretty rote document this year.
All right.
Okay. So next item on the agenda, Dr. Mann, I think, is going to come join me. We started last year doing these enrollment projections in tandem because we had so many movements in children between the virtual side and our regular enrollment. And so we kind of went back to a more traditional presentation, but in keeping sort of consistency with what we did last year, also have some slides in here where we're going to talk about the cyber enrollment and kind of the effect, so where we left off last year and what we see going forward. And so you'll get to stop listening to me in a couple of slides and get to listen to Dr. Mann, so it breaks it up a little bit. So back to where I normally start is with looking at there's three components that we look at when we look at what our enrollment numbers look like. The birth rates in the 3 municipalities within the township. Then we also look at the building permits to see what new construction is out there. Go back one, please, thanks. And then we also try to get a feel for where the population is moving within the school district. So first piece, preliminary births. This number is up a little bit. We were at 452 last year, but we were at 506 2 years ago. So that sort of 10-year average that I tend to look at is right around that 506 number. I did have the projections for the out years, which are those bars that are shaded in sort of the the buckskin red color, right around the 515 mark. So I tried to step it up a little bit to kind of get an average that's, not as conservative, that's showing something closer to what the trend line looks like. But you can also see that we had some fairly high anomalies back a number of years in some of those older years that kind of pushed that trend line up. So which is why the more recent years or the more current years that we're looking out, the ones that are closer to the year we are in now, are not showing great spikes, but something just a little bit more conservative. So then if we want to go to the next slide, as I mentioned, the second piece is looking at the building permits. And this is just the residential stuff. So I also, when I connect with each of the municipalities, I try to get an idea of what may be happening on a commercial industrial side too, just so I can kind of get a flavor for the assessed values and how that might be changing more for budget purposes than certainly enrollment purposes. You're not going to see a lot of changes on this from last year either. I mean, I think we all know with COVID, some of the growth and the construction sort of got put on the back burner. So, Devon's Creek, we have been watching. That is a project that is getting ready to kick off phase 2. We talked about that last year, but not enough of it moved last year to really move those numbers. That phase 2 of that project is probably going to be recorded in the next couple of weeks. So we should see some activity there throughout this school year now finally. When we go down, kind of further down into the 2021 column, you will see the 115 under the Upper Laycock totals. So if you remember, we talked about Market Square South last year, and that was a pretty quick build. It started in 1920, went up mostly in 2021, and they just issued the last 2 permits, I think in August of this year. So it fell into this school year for us, but mostly complete. There's a little bit of activity that needs to go through the development process in Upper Laycock Township. So I sort of have a placeholder out there, number 10, just because I'm kind of watching what's going to happen there. It's a little hard to make a guess until we actually see how everything progresses through the township and through the development piece. So not seeing a lot of activity in 2021, 22, but then looking at 22, 23, and we did talk about Greenfield last year. Dr. Z and I actually had an opportunity to sit down with some of the folks working on this project over the summer, and that's going to be a multi-condo slash townhouse kind of project. So it has some out years to it also, but just put a placeholder in for what we really thought was going to happen in the 22-23 year. They're really looking at going out to 2024 with the rest of that project development. But until they get it kicked off, we're just showing that one placeholder right now.
Where's that at again?
It's in Greenfield.
Really?
Yep. Across from the College of Health Sciences.
Oh, okay.
Wow, that used to go
The
nowhere.
hack numbers you have up there, that's the building where they're putting some residences in.
It's done, and
Is
those
it
are
finished
tended
now?
to be apartments, yeah. And they thought mostly college students
Yeah,
would
that's
move
what I
into
thought.
that,
I don't
so,
think that's going to impact our
yeah, they
population.
didn't believe so either.
So really that number there is back to 0.
It is for this year,
Yeah.
correct, yes. It was 30 last year. So then something I haven't shown you in 2 years because it just sort of didn't make sense with what we were doing last year. And I apologize if this got a little small, but certainly you can kind of pull it up and look at it on your own screen. But what I thought would be interesting, instead of just showing you, so these are our census numbers. They're not the new 2020 numbers, they're the 19 numbers. But trying to show you what those numbers looked like in 2017, which is the red line, versus the red line on the right, which is the 2019, just so you can kind of see any anomalies. So again, we're kind of looking at what do households within the district look like. That's really hard because it's not a new construction. It's, families turning over. Maybe a retired family moves out and a new younger family buys that house, and those get a little bit more nuanced and harder to capture. So I started going to these numbers to try to just see what was happening in our district. So you don't see a lot of difference between these two charts in the last 2 years from 2017 to 2019. But you do see that number at the 4-person household took a jump in the 2019 year. So that's just, something to, didn't necessarily mean somebody had an extra child. It could have meant they had an older parent or somebody move in, but the number in the household certainly increased. The next chart then, and this one, I apologize, does get a little bit small, trying to look at the population by age brackets. So starting with the under 5 years on the left, going the whole way to 85 years and over on the right. And you can see a couple of anomalies there as well. When I look at the numbers, I actually took the 2019 and 2017 and compared them so you could really kind of see where the bumps are. And except for the under 5 mark, which obviously had some change to it, the real place where we saw an increase, and it was almost 300, was the 35 to 39 category. So that was something that we hadn't seen as kind of that middle band, kind of increasing within the district. And then again, a little bump at the end on the 85 and over. The next chart then, as we start to dig into the enrollment projections, is really looking at what we call the survival ratios. So basically, if a kid is in grade 1 year, is that same kid in grade 2 the next year? So what we're looking for is to see what is most consistent is if we have a number that's 1.00. Basically, that means we had 300 kids in grade 1 and 300 kids then transitioned to grade 2. If we have a number that goes up, so you go from 300 to 305, it's going to be over 1.0. If you have a number that goes down, maybe from 300 to 295, then you're going to see a 0.9 type of number. So when you look at what we saw in 2021, certainly with the enrollment changes we had with last year's and with COVID, you're going to see those numbers go down. That's not, I think, a huge surprise. The 4-year average comes down, but it's still around that 0.95, and we have seen that 0.95 before. We saw it in 2018-19. It's not on the chart, but we saw it in 2016-17. So looking back at those numbers, is certainly something that we've seen before. The reason I show you the survival ratios is because when we get later into the presentation and we start looking at the actual enrollment numbers and what the trends look like, I base the trends on one of these two averages. So I run them both ways. I run them using the 4-year average, and then I run them using the 2-year average. And it's just important to point out, because if you look at some of those enrollment trends on a 2-year average and you think, oh my goodness, we're losing enrollment, I don't really think we're losing enrollment. It's just a factor of these numbers from 2021 playing through the system. I almost didn't put those 2-year numbers in just because I think they are undercounting quite dramatically. But I also think it gives you a good benchmark when you look at the 4-year numbers to have the 2 years to look at and kind of be able to kind of see the difference in what the averages pull through. So the next slide then gives you kind of the history of the enrollment. So I thought that was a good chart to put up. I usually do it on a 10-year basis. I think I have it back to 97 or 98 when Kim started this chart. It's all in the same spreadsheet. So if you ever want to see the old numbers, let me know. But at least it gets, obviously the slide gets really long if you do that. So just pulling the 10-year history. And you can see we were a little bit high in 2012-13, excuse me. But since then, we've been pretty consistent in that 4,100, 4,200 range. You can see that we obviously came in a little bit low in the 2021 year, but then, not a complete rebound, but back up to sort of more what I would call maybe not normal, but normalized types of numbers for the 21-22 year. And then the next chart really just shows you, because we usually look at that October 1 snapshot and what does October 1 look like. So when we start to roll into the current year's numbers, we're going to be looking at those October 1 numbers. But thought it would be helpful to just show you where we thought we were going to be in October last year and then where we ended up. And that is a really great segue for me to turn the presentation over to Dr. Mann to talk about a couple of slides of what we saw with enrollment last year.
So when you look at CBVA, what this slide is showing you is our history from 07-08. And obviously we had the anomaly of last year of 525 students. Like, what happened? And this year, going into this year, we have 99 students. So we've gone lower than I anticipated or thought we would. But when we get to the other side, I'm going to talk about some of those numbers, but I think there's something else going on there. Next slide. So here, again, to just show you the cyber charter numbers over time. And you can see the red is the totals. And the blue, just to point the blue out, is our students with special ed with IEPs. And then the green is regular ed students. So you can see in 17, 18, we were at our lowest as far as like how many students we had out in the cyber charter world. And then we had the anomaly of last year where that spike. And we worked really hard last spring to contact those folks well, actually throughout last year, trying to contact those folks as far as make sure that they are aware of us. But there was a number of that 88, 48 of them were first-time cyber charters last year. So they were reacting to COVID, and they just went. So we contacted all of them. Some of them did not know about us somehow. Others were, yeah, we know, but we wanted to do this. So, yeah. In the spring, we contacted them again and started talking to them and saying, all right, what is your intention? Do you continue to, especially that 48 number? And many of them said that they were either going back to where they came from. Some were homeschoolers that for some reason decided to do this last year. Some came back to the brick and mortar, or they're in our buildings now. And so we worked that number down, and we had close to 20 of that 50 come right back into our system somewhere. And then going into this fall, we were pretty good for the number, but when the whole mask thing started, that number went back up. So we lost a number of students there. And so still, getting paperwork in from the cyber charters on that, but we did see that go back up. So we'll start reaching out or continue to reach out to folks, and we're looking at doing a number of things, with Mel Upton being on with the marketing, for example. With the bonfire tomorrow night, we have a CVVA table, and some, just again to get our name out there, to be present. So we'll continue to do that, but that's the history of our work there, and we'll continue to work that. And one of the things that I've always done is the families that go out to these other cyber charters. Just part of the conversation is, what do you like about it? I mean, just be honest, just tell me what you like. I mean, and so how can we improve our programming based on what need is being met somehow by the cyber charter? And that's where we, over time, we developed the learning centers and having more of a flexible schedule, things of that nature, born out of those conversations. So we'll continue to do that, and so forth.
Try and just one question. When you meet with them, to try to understand their thinking, do you get into their achievement results?
No, I don't, because I don't know. I mean, it's my opinion, or my approach is, they made a decision for whatever reason.
Yeah, I know, and we don't want to disparage their decision.
Right.
However, we do want to make sure that they're aware of what level of quality that they're getting, and we are evaluated on those tests and those programs, and their students take many of the same
Right.
ones.
I make them aware in my conversations with them why, in my opinion, our program is superior. And I speak from that position and say, look, here's why if I were in your shoes, here's why I would make this decision based on X, Y, and Z. I just have never really going
If it
after
were me,
the negative.
I couldn't help but say, and that's one of the reasons we also have much higher achievement numbers. Without,
Well,
because of the way we run it, we get better results.
well, and that's the key piece there. And again, my personal thing, why I don't go that direction, unless I get pulled into there, is a lot of people, I'm going to be real general, make some generalization here.
Yeah.
When they make that decision to go cyber charter, they're looking for something else. They're looking because they're struggling for some reason. There's a population that's going out there, and they go out there and they struggle out there. They shouldn't be there in the first place, but they go out there. And so that adds to that low achievement number. If you remember a few years ago, I shared a slide with you during this presentation where I looked at the fall cyber charter enrollment numbers versus the spring cyber charter enrollment numbers. And it was very jagged, this. And what that was showing me was that in the fall, people were like, okay, and in the spring, as we get into that spring, things are falling apart. And so it goes up. When we first started ours, you go back to 07, I did a similar study, and our enrollment numbers were almost mirrored that in the very beginning, where we were very jagged. And then as we got in the past 4 or 5 years, that it's balanced, it's lowered it out. Why? Because we're doing a better job. We're being more consistent with our programming and meeting needs of students, which I think is a good thing. So that's, again, I say that because those numbers are so fluid and,
I just worry, and I remember once watching an interview from a mom, and it wasn't in Lancaster, it was somewhere else in Pennsylvania, it was outside of Philly, and they had closed the cyber school. And the mom was upset because she said her students' grades had gone up. But maybe she got C's in her home school and was getting B's there, but was she actually learning more? And I guess what worries me is I want these kids to be as prepared as possible to move forward. I don't care where they go as long as they get what they need. But unfortunately, you often don't find out if they're not getting it till they're at the end of the program. And that scares me.
correct. One of the things, if you went back to that slide where I talked about the cyber charter numbers, when you right there, that 18, 19, we had a number of students that were really not doing what they were supposed to do. And we were pushing, and that's one of the things, it's a good and bad thing. With local control, we're out there. If the students aren't doing their work, why aren't you doing your work? Can we bring you into the learning center? So some of these families, we get them to the line, and there's only so far you can bend, right? And so that's why I started to trend back up a little bit, because there was a population. Why, I'm not sure, but there was a population there that was, we're not doing what they were supposed to do. So we pushed, and we continue to do that. And that's why we have like the learning centers and the cafe, and we try to find that middle ground, meet whatever needs, and then also provide a quality academic programming. The other interesting thing when you look at that is, and this is an angle that I do use when talking with the parents, one of the best things about our program is that it is local, that our staff is involved, and we have a vested interest in your kids. Last year, when we did that large number of CVVA at the elementary level, because of those numbers, we outsourced the 6th grade with the K-12. And so I monitored that closely with Jen Krause to try and put in supports so that we were working that as a local group, whether it was like homeroom, just different activities so they stay connected. But one of the things that I noticed was that the K-12 teachers were not as committed. So when things started to buck or whatever, or fall apart, it's like, okay. Kind of what you were saying, that push, that accountability component, allowed that to happen. So what we were doing was, on our end, on the local side, was monitoring that and saying, when we saw grades starting to go down or things starting to happen or whatever, that we'd follow up locally and see what supports we needed, whether they were coming on doing Zoom tutoring and things of that nature. But you do see that. I mean,
It's interesting. I was under the impression that when a student left our district to go to a cyber program, we're no longer responsible for that student. Is that correct, or did that change?
Not academically, we're not.
We're not responsible academically, or
they're
kind of on their own?
They're enrolled in another cyber charter.
But we
And your
just,
test
but we just
scores
pay the bills?
don't get rolled into ours.
No, so they're kind of independent, they're almost out of the district except for we
Mhm.
pay the bill, et cetera, number one. Number, do you think that some of these parents don't understand what the cyber programs are about? Because I think that a lot of it is for self-study, independent learning, student athletes, traveling the world, doing that type of thing, where parents whose child who's struggling, cyber program may sound great on the radio, but it doesn't satisfy their needs.
I think there's everyone across the whole gamut. For the student that is extremely motivated and driven and involved in things, it's ideal. It allows for that flexibility, customization of their programming as much as possible. The youngster that is struggling, again, depending on why they're struggling, being exclusively, being, the whole program being out of the building or, completely virtual, that's where, again, if a student's struggling, we'll look at, well, is there a middle ground to this? Understanding why the struggle's there. I mean, because there could be a whole variety of reasons for the struggle.
Sometimes cyber is the answer, and sometimes it's
not.
not.
No.
Could
Right.
you review for me again, what happened in 2017 that our numbers went down? What were we doing or not doing there? What happened?
Well, for 2017, where the numbers we got down to 38,
Yeah.
well, that's when we opened the Learning Center, and we added in that level of programming.
Yeah.
Um,
Because if you look at those numbers, and I mean, I've been here watching this struggle from a couple kids to where it is now, and I am so in awe of the work that went into building that program, sometimes one student at a time, 1 year at a time, to get to where we are now.
Right.
I think that's admirable, and it's an excellent program for those students that it is most appropriate.
Right.
We hired extra staff, and we also said that if you could take 800,000 away from the other cyber programs and bring it back into the district, we would invest that money into Don's program and
Yes.
hiring cafes, whatever he needed to be sort of self-funded.
We have worked ourselves through so many unique and innovative programs to help get this built. And I know sometimes it was disheartening to see we went from 12 students to 14 or something like that.
Sure,
But
yeah.
it has really paid off.
Well, and I think, again, to the board's credit, the fact that you're committed to it, it was a big thing. Because back in those early days, comments that I would get from parents when I would go out and visit them.
Well, when we first started, we were using Solanco's teachers.
Correct.
It
Right,
wasn't even our own program.
correct, correct.
I mean, this really started from bare bones, knowing no idea how to use it, how to work it, how to build it, and
Well, and
I think what we have learned about, when you talk about individualized education, this was a big part of that. Because this is what some kids do need for various reasons.
I agree for that. The other thing I would just mention before we move on to this next slide is, this is something that, with cyber charters and open competition, which I think is a good thing. I mean, it keeps us honest, keeps them on. I mean, we're back and forth. This is something that we're always gonna have to work, because we're competing, which is okay. But that's, I mean, it is something we always have to work. On this slide here, again, it's just breaking down the numbers, but the one thing I wanted to point out that I think is interesting is our enrollment for elementary. We started this year at 47. Typically, in the past, that number was significantly lower, 10, 12. The most we would maybe in a good year top out at that number late in the year. We're starting there, which I think is a good thing, or an interesting thing. And a number of those students were with us last year of CVVA, and I base a lot of them continuing on was with the relationships that we built with those teachers and seeing how this could work, and with us reopening the Learning Center, because that was a big piece. People were concerned, are you gonna reopen this? And the answer is yes. We were a little unsure of what it would look like because of the numbers, because we have to manage it and things of that nature. But so far so good. But that's an interesting thing to point out. The other two numbers, the middle school's higher than it normally is, which again is a good thing. Here's the cost over time. It was there for a second. The current numbers that were billed for a cyber charter student. Mr. Talley, one of the things to the point about account or responsibility, if a student fails out of cyber charter or they leave it, they're ours because they're our resident.
True, yeah.
And so I try up front, talk to these people as much as possible and understand that, look, if this falls apart, we're here for you, right? And so if at any point along this time you start to struggle, whatever, and you start to question this, we're here and we'll help you. But also with that, also try and help them understand that, well, why don't you try it with us first? Because if it works, fantastic. If it doesn't, we're here, we're already involved in your programming. We'll do what we need to do. I just wanted to mention that. So they're the costs over time.
What do you think is special with special ed? Or cyber charter, what is special with the special ed? Do you know? I mean, what do you?
It's a
what do you-
mystery.
Do they get more support, more,
No.
nothing?
No, I mean, it's just
Just the rate?
it's just the rate, the formula that the state comes up and, if you would compare this chart to Manheim Township, to Columbia, whatever, those numbers would be all over the place.
Okay.
Because it's not the flat rate for a student. It's based on a number
It
of
does
things
not matter what
that,
their identification is.
which is, I mean, there are districts in this state where their per pupil cost is close to $50,000 for special ed.
Yeah, it's just a function of, so the formula starts with our costs, so what's in our budget for special ed? And then it's essentially just saying, oh, you're gonna take a portion of that and charge for that kid who's going to another program, so.
And we
Yeah.
won't get
So
into
think
whether or
about
not
that,
they
like the
actually get
same
appropriate
program.
services.
Yep,
Two different kids, two different districts, same program, two
two
different
different
costs.
costs.
And the other unfortunate thing is with the special needs children, they have an IEP regardless. I mean, it could be just speech and that's the charge.
Correct.
I mean, it could be
They
more
love things.
complex and that's the
Speech and
charge.
language
But
IEPs.
Okay.
That's what we talked last year, there was actually a proposal in Harrisburg to, how kind of we do the buckets of levels of special ed kids, for, kind of a lower cost kid, a medium cost kid, and then the higher cost kids, and that's sort of how our funding works when we get our special ed subsidy from the state, to apply that same type of model to this, so that, to Don's point, if you had a kid who's only receiving speech services, they're still gonna be special ed, but what we're going to pay for that child is gonna be less than the 26. And then maybe the middle kid, probably still less than 26, but maybe, something closer to that. And then, if you have a high needs kid, then that kid would certainly be more, and probably more than the 26, but at least you're only paying that on just those kids who are pulling those services.
And also to point out as something else that, again, you supported in adding was a special education teacher to that programming. So that's new this year. And, again, we're demonstrating to our family, our community, that we're invested in this and we're gonna help you as much as we can, along with this. And it'll take time to start working into those numbers, but I'm sure we'll do it. I know we will. This is just, Adele provides this chart here. It shows you the cost over time, what the district has paid out to date for cyber charters, and you can see that at one point we were getting subsidy for that, and that ended, so.
And then before we leave that chart, I mean, we talked to you all last budget year about the increase in cost, so you can see going from 1920 to 2021, those tuition costs for those kids going out, we spent about another $600,000. And even if you compare the 678, it's down this year to a little over $1 million, but it's still almost 400,000, that's gonna be in the budget this year that we're gonna have to cover, in comparison to kind of where we've historically been for those numbers. We did just, the Pennsylvania Department of Education has been sort of releasing information on a weekly basis as they've been working with the federal government on the ESSER funds, and did just in one of their more recent memos say that we are not going to be allowed to use ESSER funds to offset this cost, even though we feel like we can show that it was a COVID-related cost. So they said, well, you could use it for other things and use that money to offset this, like, okay. But we were really hoping that that would be an allowable expense, because certainly it's something that's there and we can help, shore up the budget with those funds. And then as it goes away, you can see it's already, a $250,000 drop from last year, that, then we don't have to worry about the ESSER funding going away and us, not having the money to cover it. But
And that's external cost, correct? That's not internal cyber cost?
that's the tuition, so the
Yep,
cost
okay.
that Dawn showed you times the number of kids is that number.
External.
And that, I was gonna say, I don't know if you wanna do this one or I wanna do this one. This is sort of a good segue back, I guess. So Don talked about all the cyber school numbers. On one of his summary charts, you did also see some specific numbers for 2021 and 21-22 on homeschool. So that's another thing that we saw last year, was a big jump of kids to homeschool as well. So not a surprise where those ones went. So we typically run about 190 in homeschool, and then last year we were certainly around 290. So that was definitely a
Can I
big.
assume those are mostly elementary levels?
Mostly elementary.
I can't say, I'd have to go back and look at the
What I'm
numbers.
saying is homeschooling can be difficult when you get into the higher grades.
Yeah,
Can be.
can be, right. There's a lot more going on.
Yeah, there are more sources available, but it
Correct.
still can be very difficult and
Correct. I
challenging.
don't know if you saw the article in the Sunday's paper,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But that's new.
Mhm.
That
That's
sort
new,
of thing
right.
is new. And basically that was a project learning type of school that they were establishing.
Okay, so then to the meat of the last 4 slides here, kind of diving into what the projections look like. So you see I carried the 2021 number over in blue and then kind of showing you what the 21-22 numbers look like. So those are our current October 1 snapshot numbers. And then kind of where the line is kind of shows you the projection going forward. And I'm probably not going to spend a lot of time again on this 10-year one because it uses that 2-year averaging, which is going to make these numbers look like they really drop off. The other thing to remember about this particular chart is those grade boxes in the top. Because it goes out the 10 years, we're trying to project, we're not just using the birth rates, we're now trying to project how many kids are going to be born in the next 5 years that are going to drive those numbers. So it can definitely be a lot more volatile and not nearly as accurate as a shorter projection.
And moving on 6th grade, there's a place in there that reflects that, right? The 6th grade is going to be moved into middle school.
It will, but I didn't, these are this year's numbers, so I didn't make that change. I will make that
Okay.
change next year when
Okay.
that actually happens. Yep. And I mean, it's pretty easy to see on the 6th grade line, the 300 that are gonna move, but
Yeah.
I left them where they are for this year. So yes, Dr. Z, to the 5 year. So this is sort of what we're focusing on again, because it's a little bit shorter. It uses the 4-year averaging, so it kind of smooths those anomalies out from last year a little bit. Again, I still think it's a little bit lighter than probably is what's going to come to reality, but we're going to have to kind of get some more years in that average and try to get that to smooth out. And remember, if you look at these numbers compared to what actually gets submitted to the Department of Education on our enrollment projections, they're not going to exactly match, because what we're trying to look at here is capacity. What butts do we have in seats? How many seats do we need for the kids? And so a perfect example of a place where we're not going to count, and you will see as I use 2 different charts, I will move the grade 12 number in some cases to account for CTC kids and other kids not to. I mean, there still are kids, but from a capacity standpoint, they're not in our buildings. Those 12th graders are at CTC full time, and that's going to be 50, 60, and some years it was 70 some kids. So we just kind of have to adjust for that as well. And then the next 2 charts, again, kind of doing the same methodology, using the 2-year average and then the 4-year average, but really just taking a look at the elementary school specifically. And so when you kind of look at this, and I have the stated capacity numbers on here and then showing you the variance to what the total enrollment of that building currently is versus that capacity, you can kind of see places where obviously we've got space and places where we're tight. And even though that may improve over time, again, with those the way the projections are working, I'm still going to be tighter in 2 buildings than the other 2. And this is a good segue for Mrs. Graf's point, which is once we pull those 6th graders out, then you are going to have a little bit more capacity in those 2 buildings. And that was part of the intent all along, was to be able to give ourselves some flexibility, and then hopefully come up with a plan to kind of smooth it out across the 4 schools as well. And then again, as I said, the next one gives you the same analysis, but using the 4-year averages. So I think the numbers are probably a little bit more accurate, will come more to fruition than the ones on the 2-year average. And then the very last chart is just the history of the projected to actual. And trying to kind of show you, here's where we thought we were going to be in a given year, and here's where we are or were at the end of the year actually in that year. And I updated this and it didn't get caught, but if you go back later and you pull this up, there was an error in that last column, so it's actually 3817, which matches the number on the chart three slides ago. So we were about, normally we're pretty close, we're with 25 to 100. We were off by about 200 last year, but again, it was sort of a strange year, so can't say that we thought that was something wrong with our methodology. It was just the way things were progressing last year. So unless you have anything else that you want to add, I think that's all we have for you. Unless you have questions for either one of us.
That's a lot too. A lot of numbers. Any questions? All right.
There.
Still you.
It is still me, I know. I tried to give you a little break with Dr. Mann and. All right, so last item on my list are the policies.
Can you start?
Okay, all right. Well, as long as folks can bring it up, we should be good. So if you remember, we were going to do 606 policy at the last meeting, and then it's coupled with 606.1, which is our tax assessment appeal policy that we added a couple of years ago after on KKAL's recommendation after the Valley Forge case. So we kind of decided it made more sense to pull those two and do them together instead of one at one meeting and one at the next. So when we went back and looked at the school board's policy guidebook and tried to pull some samples down, we had a pretty long tax collection policy that really, in all honesty, focused a lot on the taxpayer bill of rights, and a lot of information that we put on the back of our tax bills and then is also listed on the tax section of our website. So it's not really policy guidance, it's law or taxpayer bill of rights rules. And so we looked at some other, kind of took the extra step to look at some other local school districts and found a couple that lined up. So we're actually, in this case, recommending getting rid of the big, long policy with all the extra stuff in it and condensing it into the shorter 606 policy. Again, that it matches with the school boards, what the School Boards Association is recommending, and it also matches with a number of our colleagues locally. Just kind of cleans it up and makes it shorter. And then with that is the revised 606.1, which is the district-initiated tax assessment appeals. And really, other than a title change in that one, there were just a couple of places where I think when we did our cut and paste to bring some of the information over from the draft policy, we pulled some of the citations in addition to the actual language. So we're just deleting those to clean that up. So any questions on the tax collection or the tax assessment ones? All right. Then the other ones that are in the schedule for tonight are the tuition policy. And again, we've got some title changes there, but that is mostly a cleanup to just try to get it to match the verbiage, to just sort of match a little bit more cleanly, again, with the PSBA model. I also wanted to be careful about, in one place we referenced CV 201, and I was like, what is CV 201? I think it was intended to refer to CV policy 201, and at some point along the line we must have changed that policy and not caught this up because it's actually policy 202. So hopefully you don't have any questions on that one, because that one was pretty cut and dried as well. 608 on bank account.
One quick question on
Okay,
607. How are the rates determined?
So the tuition rate is actually, this is a little bit interesting. It is actually set by the state, but it
Okay.
is not set until May.
Okay.
So some districts will actually try to pre-calculate a rate because they will send out the tuition invoice like halfway through the year for the first half. And then the second half, they'll actually do like a reconciliation and
curious,
kind of
because
catch it up.
Who was it and under what guidelines we
But
decide
the
on how
state-
to set it? It's a state law.
Yep, mhm.
Okay.
They calculate it and they release it, they post it, anybody can see it, they post it to the
Okay.
PDE website, usually May of each year.
Okay.
So at the very end of the year, yep. Okay, so back to bank accounts, and this one should be kind of familiar because we just approved our depositories and a new bank account and all that. So again, just tried to pull some information off that didn't make sense. The financial institutions do provide a statement to us, not to the board. And certainly we provide reports to you. You get those in your treasurer's report, but you're not getting the bank statement, you're getting a treasurer's report. So just trying to make sure that what we're capturing, what we're actually doing, and the wording didn't quite seem to get us there.
That particular wording that you deleted, and I couldn't find it, doesn't mean it wasn't there, where that was picked up somewhere else, where you deleted the monthly statements and board reports. Does that show up somewhere else?
Yeah, so the monthly statement we took out because you don't get a monthly statement from the
Okay.
bank. We get the monthly statement
Yeah.
from the bank. And yes,
But are
we-
they required to give just that monthly statement?
not to you, to us.
Are they required to give the district that monthly statement?
Well, yes, they have to give us a statement of our account,
Monthly?
yes.
That was my question.
Okay.
Is that simply how the bank functions? Or
Yeah,
do they
uh-huh.
have to give us that statement every month?
So are you asking
Are
me,
they
is it
giving
in
it to
law
us,
that
are they
they?
giving it to us because they give it to us, or are they giving it to us because they have
Have
to?
to.
Yeah,
That's what
they
she's
always
asking.
do it. I don't know if
That's
it's in
right.
law. I can go look it
Yeah.
up.
I mean, that was my question, are they obligated to do that to us, provide that money?
Well, let me say this, I would obligate them if they weren't obligated, because you don't want to not, so to me, it doesn't matter whether it's law or not. I'm going to require them to report that to us because we
And I see
need
where
to
you're
know what
going,
it
'cause that
is.
first sentence that is crossed off here.
Yeah.
Financial institutions shall provide a monthly statement of all expense,
Yeah,
period.
It's gonna be
but that's not there
financial
anymore.
And keep that one there.
law.
Yeah, I think I should be clear that that's a requirement, I mean,
That'll give us a little bit of,
yeah. And my other one, well, the board report, that would be elsewhere in a completely different set, but it just seemed to me that you're basically saying, we don't have to give us a monthly report. Not that you wouldn't follow best practices, not that the bank wouldn't, but there's a difference when it's done because it has to be done.
right.
Yeah, and we took that off because we're providing to you the treasurer's report, not a monthly report from the bank.
But you
Does
should
that
also
make
be,
sense?
but you should also be required to get that from the bank every month.
Yes, okay. I
That's
thought we
what
were
I'm
moved
saying.
past that one, okay.
That's what I meant.
Yep,
And,
okay.
I remember we just, approved the new depositories. Do we do that every year?
Approve the
Not
deposit?
approve, no, get quotes.
No,
But I
We
know
do
we
not.
did it this year. How often do we do that?
oh my goodness, when
It
was
was
the,
about 10, 12 years ago was the last time we
Excuse
did
me?
it. More than
10, 12 years ago.
about 10 years
12
ago.
years ago.
Mhm.
That seems a bit long, but.
Yeah, and we can certainly shorten that up,
Yeah.
but we don't, I mean, that's a lot of work
I'm
to
not
go
saying
out and
I'm
get
not
all the
saying it has to be in
quotes.
policy. I just wondered what your regular rotation was for that.
Right, yeah, I'm not
Because
sure
I did
we've
read-
had a
Because I
regular
was surprised
rotation
to
on
see,
that one.
there were some changes and that's unusual. I think the last time we had no changes. And the surprise, I
I'm
was
sorry,
a little
last time-
surprised at the changes that we approved.
Okay,
Because as I remember, the last time we didn't have any. But that, 12 years ago, who knows what I remember.
so yeah, but the actual depositories, yes, you approve those
Yes, I
every
know.
year.
Yeah, I know
so-
that. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else on that one? Are we good? Okay. All right, and then the last one is the lengthy one, but again, we didn't make a ton of changes to it, is the investment policy. Most of the changes here where there were the minimize uninvested balances was a repeat of something we had said earlier in the policy. A couple of the definitions, collateral, local government investment pools, and I guess we need to get numbers on those. Sorry about that. We stuck them in the right places and we just need to renumber, so we'll fix that for next week. But some of the definitions that we refer to in the policy, and we actually had, the definition wasn't there. So when we went back to PSBA, we're able to find the definitions. I'm not sure why they weren't there before, but we added them in to make sure if we're referring to something that obviously the definition is there to follow it as well.
We'll clear up the misspells too.
Uh-oh, we got misspells?
There's a few of them in
There are a
there.
couple in there.
Okay, all right, yep, we can do that. And then compliance with the government accounting standards. Actually, that section and the protection of the bank balances in excess of the FDIC limits are actually two sections that look like they were added, but it was one of those situations I had explained to you before where when we sent the policies up to PSBA and sometimes like the whole thing didn't make it, it was really strange. It like lopped off the back. So I don't know if somebody did a cut and paste and just missed the end of the policy. That's kind of what it felt like. But it had been there when I went back and looked at our prior policy. So it actually was not added. It was there and just didn't get transitioned over when we went to board docs.
At 609.800, it refers to the investment officer. Who's that?
So that definition should be under the definitions. So 609-400, it says the investment officer is the treasurer, chief finance and operations officer, director of finance, or another officer designated by the board.
Okay, who is that? Who have we designated?
So far, we have designated the treasurer, the
So
people
all
that are
those.
named there, all of them.
So there is not an investment officer. There is a
Correct.
group.
There are multiple, and that's, part of that's checks and
That's the
balances.
first time I really remember seeing that phrase. That could be because these things are dry and not terribly interesting.
You are correct, they are dry and not terribly interesting. That language wasn't new, so it was there before.
Okay.
And we
Usually
just-
when I see something like that in a policy, I'm wondering who in our district, is responsible for that.
Do you wanna put investment officer / group?
I just wanted to know who it was and if that was the title, but if we don't have an investment officer singular, maybe it should reflect the reality. You have to make a point.
Put like a S in parentheses behind it,
Yeah, that would do it.
Yeah, officers.
Yeah, that would do it.
The one thing, and so we could change about that particular section is that would have been originally looked at by all of you when a board member was the board treasurer, right? So now I fill both of those roles. So we actually
So
could
you're
change
two
that.
people, of that list,
I'm
you're
two
two of those
people.
people. You know, that ought to be straightened out. Just write whatever we need so that it reflects reality.
Right. Yeah, and we normally, for checks and balances, try to keep it to more than one person, so that if something,
Well, that's actually what drew my attention,
Yeah.
meaning there, because it sounded like there was one investment officer, and I thought, well, that means we're stuck with one person's
Yeah,
perspective.
no, we wouldn't want to need to do an investment and one of us be incapacitated and not have a backup, so we make sure that, it's like check signers, you make sure that you have multiple people,
Well, it
so.
just seemed as if that involved decisions that ought to be at least discussed between two people. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right,
Thanks, Phyllis.
we good?
Yep.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Jill. You are the next contestant.
Yes. Okay, so the next two pieces are coming from elementary, and also we are expanding to include a K-8 framework for these next two. So as you know, we are making plans to look at the ESSER funding that has come our way, and particularly in our roles, focusing on that set aside for learning loss, or as PDE is calling it, accelerating learning. And so one of the things that we've been doing is really identifying where in our system, whether it's core instruction, which we kind of call that tier 1 supports, or our advanced tiers, our interventions, we're looking at where the strengths are and where those gaps are that we really need to fill in order to make sure we have that robust system to address the learning acceleration that we need post-COVID. And so these next two pieces are beginning to take those first steps. The first one is the contract with IU13, where we're going to be working with the elementary principals and then also Dennis as well. We want to be very intentional about how we put the proposal together with our ESSER money specifically to accelerate learning. And so we're going to be spending a day with some of the best educators in the field right now at IU13 who work with districts all across Lancaster and Lebanon to ensure that we really have our vision for the next 3 to 5 years here. We are taking the lessons we've learned from this experience over the past 2 years. What do we want to stop? What do we want to start? What do we need to continue on with? But then also identifying that vision of what's next in moving the instructional model and the profile of a CV learner forward. So the first contract, you're looking at the leadership instructional framework. We're going to be working through some training and consultation with that team for us as school leaders, district administrators, to get really clear on that focus and on how these pieces of the comprehensive plan are going to play out in our instructional planning over the next couple of years. So that is the first agreement. Any questions for that one?
And all that's gonna be covered in one day?
It's going to be the start. It's going to be the start. Great question.
Are you still on the, I don't have mine with me, so I don't know which is in which order. We talked about the STEM curriculum development, is that what it
That's
is?
next.
Oh. So this is the leadership instructional, okay. I'm working off of notes instead of the other.
Gotcha.
But while I have your attention, before you even start, I was gonna tell you what it was I was looking at it in the STEM one, was whether or not there's anywhere where there is a gender focus for girls in STEM.
Oh, great question. So any other questions on that one? Then we'll move into STEM. Okay, so the STEM piece then pairs perfectly with that visioning, right? Moving toward more personalized learning, looking at where we need to fill some of those areas with our core instruction. And so specifically, we want to really do the deep dive into the science and STEM resources at the elementary level. We've got Brownstown up and running with these awesome STEM labs and different spaces. And so Dr. Graybill is also the elementary STEM core team leader. So as we shifted from the content area supervisors to department chairs and core team leaders, Dr. Graybill is in that role. Dr. Daniger did an awesome job getting us all set up. But we want to spend the next 2 years doing that deep dive into the curriculum work around STEM. We know that the state is moving to a new set of science standards in just a couple of years. And so we're working proactively on this timeline. Specifically, we're going to be having developing design challenges for use of those learning lab spaces. Brownstown will kind of be that front runner. Dr. Graybill's got his STEM committee together. He's working with the elementary librarians to create those experiences that we can then take to Leola, to Smoketown, to Fritz, after they've been vetted. And so there is not yet, we haven't gotten to that level of detail about the opportunities to increase specifically target girls in STEM, but it's a fabulous idea and I will absolutely take it back to the team. Again, we're working with Lauren Beal from the IU, who she is, if you think I have energy, get Lauren in a room talking about STEM and science. She is just passionate and an expert in this area. So I would wager that she will bring some of that to the table for sure.
You said it's gonna be a couple of years. I was under the impression that the new science standards were pretty well along. Am I wrong?
They were pretty well along, and then the stakeholder group voted the most recent version down because they actually went back to the department and said, we want more environmental science standards, specifically agriculture, which I thought was awesome for our area. I
Instead
mean,
of coming out with those and then adding that later, they held the whole thing up.
right. So-
That's state government.
So they're looking at those next-gen science standards, but they're creating the Pennsylvania version, and that's where some of the stakeholders said, hey, there wasn't quite enough there. So they're looking at 23, 24 as the testing year. 24, 25 for the testing year, 23, 24 for the rollout of those new standards. So I'm happy to see that Dr. Grable wanted to take this on with his team and get ahead of this and be proactive on
Because
them.
I was under the impression it was ready to come out. Because the sooner people have even a modified version of it, the sooner they can be working on their curriculums in the local school districts.
Yes, yeah.
So we'll wait till 24.
Again, I will tell you, the glass half full for us
Yeah.
is, as we roll through our 3-year comprehensive plan, ELA, which we haven't looked at in 12 years because COVID,
Mm-hmm.
and then math, which we pushed back 1 year, and then science. So we're gonna look at all 3 in a row, plus we have ESSER's funds to help us fund this. So right now, we're okay with science being pushed back,
Yeah.
so we're okay with it, even though it's,
Financially, I get it. Educationally, I remember Dr. Doniger a year or so ago talking about the new science standards coming out.
yep,
And he seemed very confident that what we had was very much in line with what he knew of what would be the new ones. I don't know if every school district has an idea of what these changes are, because you don't make these changes overnight.
Mm-hmm,
So,
right.
if we don't get that till 2024, 25, it could be, a couple years until we have a full curriculum rebuilt around it.
Mm-hmm.
That's
right.
great.
Yeah.
All right. I like the
Something
plan.
just moves slowly.
I like it.
Yeah.
Good,
Good,
thank you.
you bet.
Okay, so I'm up next, and that's the comprehensive plan. Back during my presentation last month, I provided you 3 documents. The one document is the actual printout of the comprehensive plan out of the state site. Third one was a PowerPoint presentation that I walked through. And the third one was a smaller document, that was more of a summary document that outlined committee members, or not members, I'm sorry, committees that are necessary to move this whole thing forward. Following that presentation, I said to you that I would take that, we posted it on the website. I made copies and made it available in every building in the district. And we publicized that and so forth. And Joe and I put together a Google Doc
Google Form.
form so people could submit any questions, comments, whatever. And 0. So,
Well, it's not, engaging reading.
We
I mean,
think
it's
it
what, 120 some pages?
so at this point,
It's long.
right, it's long. At this point, unless you have questions or comments or concerns, what I would suggest that we do is put it on consent agenda next week, right, for approval.
It is more of an internal type of how we're going to organize type of thing. Doesn't get a lot of people excited.
No, I agree.
But it is a Herculean effort to create that.
Oh,
It is,
document,
absolutely.
And thank you for all the
It
work
is.
you've done for
Yeah, you're
that.
right.
Well, I mean, it's a long,
So much work is gonna be built on that, and we worked so hard to try to get all of our documents aligned.
Mhm.
That's a huge piece of it.
Yeah. Kudos to you guys.
I don't feel like you got enough credit
I
that
Yeah.
night.
agree,
So,
100%, yeah.
I know that's common work. It was very appreciated.
Absolutely.
Good, thanks, Don and Jill.
Thank you.
All right, board, you have in front of you tentative agenda for next week. This is the time in our meeting for public comments. Do we have any comments this time from the public?
Hi, good to see you guys again. I'm Mark Gensel, 36 West Main Street. Who's recording that?
Who's recording?
It's over here.
Oh,
No, it's over here.
Oh, okay, I always like to at least look at the table, used to the bigger room, so, hi.
Mark, you
Recording that.
can have a seat, if you don't
Oh,
mind.
is that okay? All right, I wasn't sure if I was supposed to stand without a mic in front of me, I don't know what to
That's the mic
do.
right there.
Oh, is this it? Okay, so I don't have to do that
You don't
then.
have to get that close.
All right. So anyway, yeah, back again, but I said I would be here at every one, so here I am. I wish there was more of us, though, to your point, and even like what you guys were saying about you post something out there and nobody responds to it. I think that's shame on us in a lot of ways for not getting involved till now. So the first thing I wanted to bring to the table is I would like to make a demand upon the board immediately that whenever whoopie pies are served, that they are allowed to be accessible to everybody in the room. Because you don't put that kind of thing in front of a chubby guy and expect him not to get upset about it, because they look amazing. So besides that, one of the things I also said that whenever I spoke at a group, I also wanted to just spend a brief moment in prayer. So if you guys are okay with that, I just want to do that. So dear Heavenly Father, thank you for the members of the school board and for our superintendent. I pray that you keep your hand of protection over them and their families. I also continue to lift up our nation and our community, especially here in CV in prayer. We need you, Jesus, and we love you. Amen. So I know things, the last couple meetings were a little bit more rowdy, and then now it's kind of quieted down, especially when it's, it's kind of the business as usual meeting in here. So I just want to reiterate the hearts and minds of the people that I would never say I'm representing, but the like-minded people that I'm speaking to, the hundreds of other families that have their concerns. And so for those of us, we're the parents that are freedom-minded, and we're still here. We're still looking for ways to fight what we believe is the unconstitutional overreach of our government and the Departments of Health and Education. But we also understand that this is a marathon now, and we're not going to stop speaking out for our rights as parents. So I want to get that over well. So a couple things. One thing, I think it was you, Mrs. Groff, you mentioned there was an article that you wrote. I missed that completely. Do you know where I could find that?
Sunday's paper,
It was Sunday's paper?
Sunday
Okay.
perspective page.
I'm gonna have to go back and read that.
Drive by my house, I'll give you a copy.
Okay,
Mark,
yes,
it really
ma'am.
just refocuses on, we need to get together and we need help. Because we need paraprofessionals, bus drivers, custodians.
Yeah,
We can't do it by ourselves. We need that community to come together and come on inside the buildings and let's make a difference.
Didn't you have a
Absolutely.
couple copies of Sunday's paper laying
No,
around
I
here?
don't.
well, luckily I can, with the magic of the internet, I should
Yep.
be able to find that pretty easy, so, but I always like to look at the words that you write, Dr. Z, so I'll look for that. Because I hate to walk in and be like, wait, what, he wrote something and I missed it, how did I miss that? I thought I was paying attention. And so I think, and you had mentioned that at the beginning of the meeting too, that how do we get the community more involved? And one of the things that the heart cry for me in particular particularly with this, the mandate, which I'm hoping isn't the start of a travesty that's going to happen, but it's creating division. Dr. Z, you had spoke on that too, when you were talking about getting before hopefully the Department of Health and saying, were you intending this kind of division in communities? Do you understand what this is doing to people? Because it is. It's just driving a wedge between friends and families and students and teachers and parents and everything. And it should have never been like this. It should have never been like this. And maybe we can blame it on COVID. I don't know. But either way, it's here. It's the reality, and it's what we've got to deal with. So we always have to, and for a lot of us, it's hard from our perspective to say, how do we put ourselves out there? Because it feels like if we're complying, then we're agreeing to give up our rights. And we don't want to do that. But at the same time, we do love our children, which is why we're standing up so strongly for our rights as parents to have that choice. So what is the solution? I don't know. I do know that communication is still the key. I will say, Mrs. Groff, when you are eventually not on the board anymore, I'm kicking myself for not at least attending for years past, as long as my kids have been involved in
Yeah, I
CV, because you
wondered
seem
where
to be
you've
as a
been.
plethora of like a fountain of knowledge of everything that happens. And I think that's gonna be missed, so I just
Thank
wanted to
you.
say I appreciate
Thank
that. And for the rest of you too. You guys had mentioned at a previous meeting, you had like a get to know your school board thing, where a couple members would go out and people could engage and talk. And we've missed all that stuff. And I think it's both. You have busy families and stuff, but we shouldn't be relying on everybody to educate our children, at least without knowing who all of our educators are. And it's easy to get to know teachers. It's not easy to get to know board members. And that's definitely been, that's now, I see it as a glaring problem that we all should have done something different about it in the past. But like you said, it's hard to engage people, even in 120 documents of probably fairly boring reading. But it's still all that important stuff that we're supposed to be connected with. So how do we bridge some of the gaps there? I don't know.
Well, real quick, you talked about rights.
Yeah.
Usually if a right's being violated, the legal system kicks in, ACLU, lawyers, judges.
We're not gonna, yeah, let him speak. and
Let him
then we-
speak, all right.
No, actually,
Just out of curiosity.
I will say I
It's not a-
appreciate the banter.
yeah,
it's-
Yeah,
yeah.
I do appreciate the back and
Just trying to
forth.
figure out what rights are we violating, that's just.
No, it's not you. It's Governor Wolf and the Department of Health. And we're not the only ones. I mean, even if you go to Lancaster County Sheriff's website, he talks about how this is an unconstitutional overreach. You know, the Pennsylvania Constitution and the US Constitution defend the rights of parents, just like you have the right to decline any medical treatment you want. There's all kinds of rights and things that are built in, and again, you can read his words, but the Department of Health and Education are not law-creating bodies. They can't just create a law and put it out there. They can put out a recommendation, and they're basing it on a law that isn't applicable. So that's where we come in and we go, it was so great when it was optional, and then they made it mandatory, and it created division, because for those of us who are healthy kids, and I think a lot of it is just a respect issue. If we're sick, we're gonna keep our kids home. If I'm sick, I don't go to work, and I visit businesses all the time. That's my job. If I'm sick, I stay home. But anyway, I would love to have that conversation with anybody though, because again, it's just, and it needs to be, I think the important thing is it needs to be a conversation and not a screaming match. And so far, CB, I think, other than from the emails you all have been getting, and I cannot apologize for everybody, only the ones that I have sent to where I know I was having an emotional response, but even in those emotional responses, we try to stay respectful as possible. I will never do anything to sacrifice my right to speak in front of you guys. By doing something to create disrespect. That's not worth it to me, because we need to have the conversation, and the conversations are not happening enough in our country as it is. But regardless of how we all feel about that, it's hard when we feel that the state is taking away our right as a parent, and it's forcing the school to kind of enforce that. Like even when you guys talk about cyber and CVVA and all those kinds of things, and you even say like it only works for the students that really need that. That it actually works for a student that actually needs that kind of environment, a self-starter, a go-getter, that kind of a thing that can really be successful. And yet the state is making you guys use it as punishment for the parents that just want to express their right to have the choice. So for a lot of us, it's hard to say, yeah, let's get involved and let's bridge the gap in the community, when for us to do that, we have to show compliance. And then the compliance sometimes is used against us and said, oh, well, look, 90% of you are compliant, so therefore it's not a big deal. It is still a big deal in the hearts and minds of a lot of the families. It is. And I just don't want you guys to ever lose sight of that, if you can. That's all. That's a simple request. I don't expect you guys to solve the problems. Like you said, Dr. Z, when you posted all the stuff about the state legislatures and stuff that we should be reaching out to. They're fighting the fight for us against the state. I know that's what needs to happen. But the division was still created with the order. And so we're left here, and unfortunately, like I know, Michael, you opened up a little bit at the end of one of the meetings too, where you felt like you actually expressed a lot of things that were being said were untrue. And I know I've said things that are untrue, and I thank you for actually voicing that. It was also the first meeting I actually stayed to the end. Again, I'm kicking myself all the time. Every time I walk in one of these meetings, I'm like, you're such an idiot. Why haven't you done this before? But here I am. So regardless to stay, it's, for a lot of us, we're in it. We want to find a way. We do. We want to find a way forward. But we're also very concerned about what's coming down the line. When you have Governor Wolf saying, the mandate's not going to be lifted until everybody can be vaccinated, then a lot of us are concerned about vaccinating our children. And the acting secretary is saying she's going to encourage schools to get ready for vaccine clinics. That's the wording they're all using. We're encouraging schools to get ready for vaccination clinics in school, because that's coming. And we haven't seen those since smallpox and polio and stuff like that. That's scary for a lot of us. We get a little worried about that. And knowing the threats they can make to you guys, it doesn't leave us with a lot of confidence. And that's what we want to have. So again, all I'm sharing is a heart cry. I'm not expecting a solution of anything. I'm not necessarily to put forward a motion and say, we will solve all your problems tonight, Mark. If you could vote on that, that'd be fantastic. I'll lay out more of a personal one too, if you want. We can keep going. But I think that's really all I wanted to say tonight was, and I do appreciate, it's hard not to sit in this room and hear all the people that are involved and all the stuff that I have no comprehension of yet with budgets and everything and all the stuff that goes into actually making this work for a school. You sit in here and you hear this and you go, okay, these people know what they're talking about and they're not volunteering their time because they just were bored on a Monday night. Like, they actually care. And I do believe that. And I think that's something that I want to space specifically to you, Mike. I understand that you do care. And I think any of us that sit in the room long enough will understand that you guys do care. So I apologize that you've been attacked in that way from me personally. I apologize if I've attacked you that way. So we need to find a way to move forward, and we want to help the community and stuff too. So again, in the essence of clear communication, anything you can do to make things clearer for us, easier to find. Even sometimes I must forget the same way to navigate to your superintendent notes every time I go to the website, because every time I'm like, how come I'm not finding the superintendent notes from the meeting? I can't find them. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's a brain fart, but it continually happens. So anything we can do there to just open up lanes of communication will always help. I don't expect any school board members to be like, hey, come on out and get to know us now, because you would be opening yourself to a tirade of disrespect, and I get that. But how do we bridge the gap? Maybe for the members that are coming in that are going to be voted on, how do we get to know them without necessarily putting themselves out in a public format? Is there some kind of a way to do that, just so we know who we're voting for and just to get to know them personally? It's a crime that it hasn't happened, that we haven't been more involved, but we want to be. And I know of at least 300 families that want to be involved, and we just have to figure out how to do that. So anyway, I think I'm over my time, but that's it. Thanks, guys.
I mean, I will say, not that we're dialoguing here, but just so that you know, like, everyone that sits around this table, including, I mean, all of us, we have a deep care for Conestoga Valley. Yeah. And unfortunately, times.
Absolutely.
You know, and I mean, all of us have been on this board, some longer than others, but yeah, we don't do what we do because it's necessarily fun or the greatest thing, because there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we would probably love to do on Monday nights and
Sure.
so on and so forth. So there is a great amount of care that goes into the education of our students.
Yes.
And so that's what we're here for.
And one of the things that I often say when because again, and you had mentioned it too, Mike, sometimes people just need to vent, and unfortunately sometimes you guys are the target of that for sure. But people still need to vent. They need an outlet to get out. So like what you're saying, absolutely. I think we're just missing that piece. People are upset. They're trying to find a way to express themselves. We don't really have a way to do that. If we could, if the Secretary of Health would come out and have a conversation with me, man, that'd be fantastic. But we all know that's not going to happen.
Sure.
But anyway, and I appreciate you saying that. And for those of us that are starting to get that, we do. I sincerely appreciate all that you guys have done and all that you continue to do. This is such a complicated process, educating an entire community of kids. I get that. I really, really do. So thanks for taking the time to listen to me tonight. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank
To
you.
make you feel better, you can have my pie.
I'll stick around after the meeting for that.
Mine too, but I think she already took it. I make one comment,
Oh, all right.
please. Those people that don't come to board meetings and don't pay attention to what we're doing should not feel guilty.
No,
You
no, no.
cannot go to board meetings, township meetings, county commissioners, water authority, and all those other, you can't do that. That's why we have elections. For when they do come, when there's something that really has struck a nerve with them, we welcome them. The one thing I do agree with, though, is that, and we have struggled with this as long as I've been on the board, which is communication. It is so difficult to develop a communication system because it takes people on both sides.
Right.
And we've come up with a number of programs over the years that mostly fell on their face, but some of them took hold, and that's always been part of our board requirement, is to maintain communication.
And we can always do better, and I think
Oh,
with the things
absolutely.
that have started with Dr. Z in this, it's getting,
Yes.
it's this crisis has put us in a place to have to try to do it better. So we're trying.
Thank you.
Yep. Any board matters tonight? Any board initiatives? All right, board, with that, I will take a motion to adjourn to executive session for legal and personnel reasons.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?